Hello and welcome back to another review of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon, and today this is episode 5 of season 2 of the Book of Carol, and I cannot believe the quality of this episode because the last episode I absolutely hated. I gave that a 4 out of 10, and the one before that I gave that a 10. How are we having this massive quality drop in episode 4? And this episode just brings it all the way back up. I am just really happy with episode 5. And this episode, our group finally get back to Paris. And there is not any filler. This episode really feels like they're telling the story. And I really enjoy this episode because everyone's in Paris. Everyone is now hunting for each other. It's a massive game of cat and mouse. And that's really entertaining. There are multiple scenes in this episode where characters meet up and everyone has to we have to slide away, we have to go do this, and they're like hiding from each other's little spats constantly. It's a really nice episode. I really enjoy the tension, the pace in this episode, and I would have to say this episode has great cinematography. There are some really amazing scenes in this episode that I will talk about later, but they are outstanding. This episode has a lot that episode 3 has, but it is missing a few things here and there. The biggest thing I want to mention about this episode is that Caudron. They have finally given Caudron a massive amount of screen time. He's barely been in the last 4 episodes. In episode 5, he is basically one of the few things that keep the plot moving. I really enjoy Caudron getting all this screen time. He really does deserve it, and his pairing with Laurent in some scenes is really cool. I really like the Caudron and Laurent scene quite early on this episode, and I thought, okay, he's going to help Laurent escape and that would be it for Caudron, because the show doesn't know how to balance Carol and the original cast. It seems a lot like Fear the Walking Dead, but this episode really balanced Carol and the original cast. You had Caudron getting a lot of screen time, and it felt really nice because after episode 3 and 4, I started to worry okay, definitely in 4, they really ruined the original cast just so Carol could be in this show. And now we have Caudron getting a lot of screen time. It's great. I'm really happy, but it's still, this show I feel would have been better if Carol wasn't in it. I'm getting that feeling now, which is bad. Carol has taken over this show, and I shouldn't be excited when a side character actually gets scenes. This is his first episode basically, and we are the penultimate episode of the season. But outside of the whole Carol issue, Caudron, amazing. He has some great scenes. I like him and Daryl's interactions, and this is really Caudron's redemption arc. Even though this probably should have happened earlier in the season, but he had no screen time. So I'm really happy Caudron is being redeemed in this episode. And by the end of this episode, I feel Caudron is redeemed because he teams up with Daryl to fight Losang. And talk about Losang, absolutely phenomenal villain. I really enjoy every scene that he is in. He steals the show, he's a great villain. And every time he pops up in a random scene, I get really excited. Like you have Vouloir's camp in Paris, and Caudron and Laurent are talking, and then Losang walks in, and then it's all like, where's Laurent? And it's absolutely amazing. And then it happens again with the nightclub, and I'm really happy we see the nightclub again. We see Anne again, really interested in the nightclub. I'm really happy they're reusing that set, and it's all going fine. Daryl's talking to Anne, and then bam, Losang is there, and it's absolutely amazing. However, this episode isn't all just wins. One thing I really didn't like is the writing around Ash at the start of this episode, because this episode starts with Daryl and Carol getting back to the plane because Laurent won't go with Daryl, and Daryl's a bit hurt about this, but he's going back, and there's no Ash, and you find out Ash is at Madame Janae's old camp, and he's hiding inside of a car after he's been surrounded by walkers. I don't know how he got over there, and I just find it really annoying. The writing's a bit weak. It's like, okay, we need Daryl to spend more time in Paris to convince Laurent to come with him. So they teleported Ash somewhere else instead of hiding at the plane so that Daryl could go off and do that instead. And I didn't like that. I thought, okay, you could have done something more interesting with Ash. You could have made a better way why Daryl has to stay slightly longer so that he can interact with all these characters. It felt like the first part of the story with Ash was a buffer so that Losang could get to Paris. You could have all these incidents happen and then Daryl be brought back into the story. Because before that, Daryl was about to leave. So I didn't like the little buffer thing with Ash. I thought it was dumb. However, there were some cool scenes. I really enjoyed when Carol and Daryl saw Ash in the car and they're like, okay, let's just fight our way towards it. And you've got some cool fight scenes, and then they trap themselves in the car and you're like, okay, you're not very smart. And then Daryl's like, you know what? Let's make some ampers. And that was amazing. He shoots 2 walkers, they turn into ampers. And then from the inside of the car, the cinematography is amazing where it pans around and the blood is just going all across the windows. I really enjoy that because it makes the ampers seem scary and we don't have to see it. And that's how you should be writing it. It's you show us it in ways where we don't see it, so we imagine it be way worse than it actually is. Absolutely amazing. And then the ampers just kind of butt rush into the vehicle. And I don't like how they were killed very quickly. This might be the last time we see ampers. It better not be. But that whole scene with Daryl and Carol, even though I didn't like the Ash plot that it was attached to, that scene in the car was absolutely amazing and great cinematography. And once you get past that whole Ash plot, there are some pretty amazing scenes. I really like how they separate Daryl and Carol at that point. Even though they just go out together, Carol goes off to sit at the plane and to finally have that conversation with Ash and the big reveal. And I really, really enjoyed the scene mostly. There's one bit I will talk about in a minute. But the scene where Ash finds out does work. I'm really happy that they can swear now because Ash is dropping F-bombs left, right and centre. And it really does make it feel more impactful, more emotional. The scene is just improved by the better writing that the spin-offs get with the dialogue. Because if this was on The Walking Dead, it would have been pretty mid. I'm going to be honest. They couldn't even do anything like this. Just because they can now swear properly, it really does help raise the impactfulness of certain scenes. So I really like Ash's reaction, how mad he is at Carol, because I was at the start of this episode a bit worried because Daryl was like, you should do it, and then Carol's not doing it, and they're like, oh, they're just going to kind of tiptoe around the situation that Carol manipulated Ash. I'm really happy that you had Carol finally tell Ash, and Ash beforehand was being like, this has helped me. Thank you for bringing me to help find your daughter. I'm sorry she's dead. And then Carol's like, yeah, I came here for Daryl. And then it's just this whole big scene. But there's one issue, and this is probably the biggest issue, even though it's the smallest issue technically. They mess with the timeline again. I almost just sweared, that's how mad I am. They mess with the timeline. Carol says Sophia died 12 years ago. And then I face-palmed because I'm like, great, so the show takes place in 2022, even though that is impossible. What is with the Walking Dead universe and saying everything takes place in 2022? It is so annoying because Fear takes place in 2022, the final season. The Ones Who Live takes place in 2022. The Walking Dead season 11 and season 10 both take place in 2022, even though there's a 6-month time jump at the start of season 11B. So what's going on? And now this takes place in 2022. Why does everything take place in 2022? It's very clear there is no overseer. Even if Scott Gimple's overseeing, he is not actually being like, actually, fact checked, you're wrong. This is the whole Dwight and Sherry thing on Dead City, when Dwight and Sherry rebuild the sanctuary, but then you have the crowd saying the sanctuary is ash a couple months before the events of Dead City. So does that mean Dwight and Sherry are dead? It's really, really annoying. This cannot take place in 2022 because The Walking Dead does not end until 2023. So how is Carol currently fighting the Whisperers or the Commonwealth of the Reapers, depending what point in the timeline or when they retcon it, and in France at the same time? It really annoys me and just completely baffles me how many times they've messed up their own timeline because you just can't keep track, because 1 minute it takes place in this year and then they're just going to retcon it a couple months later or do something like that. Like, they need some proper oversight in this franchise to properly see what is going on, when is going on. This is such a small thing, so I'm going to try and move on, but it really did annoy me, and it's such a small thing. But moving on to the rest of this episode, and it was good. I really enjoyed it, and this episode has a lot of emotion. I really liked the Daryl plot, and I like how Daryl was really spending a lot of this episode trying to convince Laurent to come. And then when he finally agrees to come, it's revealed that Laurent was trying to save Daryl in a way, because he believes every time someone gets close to him, they would die. So Laurent was closing himself off to Daryl to save him. And then immediately after that, we get this epic scene in the Catacombs. I cannot not mention this scene. You have Daryl and Caudron run to the Catacombs and team up to take down Losang and his little militia. And it was just absolutely amazing seeing Daryl and Caudron picking off this group one by one like assassins. They felt like absolute badasses. And when it was just Losang and his number one, you had these one-on-ones. And I really enjoyed Daryl and Losang's fight. It felt like a very even fight for once, even though Daryl was an absolute unit. I really enjoyed how it felt like Daryl and him were trading blows. And the only reason Daryl won is because he just, in a way, cheated. He grabbed a skull and started beating Losang's head in. And then, big spoilers, they kill Losang. And it felt deserved. And it felt like, yes, this is the right time to kill Losang. You couldn't really do much more of him. And it was very well done. However, it did annoy me that it seems like we're getting yet another villain change. This is the third villain change in 6 episodes. It looks like Losang's number one. I don't know her name. It looks like she's now going to be the villain for the final episode. And I just didn't like that. I preferred that they would both die and the final episode would be about the whole issue that's raised at the end of this episode. And that is that Daryl, Carol, Ash and Laurent cannot all fit on that plane. And that's what the final episode should have been about. It should have been about the survival threat. Not, okay, you now have this character who's replaced Losang, who replaced Madame Genet, now being the main villain for the final episode to go fight Daryl. I just thought it was annoying. It's just another villain change. It's just happened way too many times. And they should have done something different. And talking about the ending, as I mentioned, there's a whole big reveal that they all can't get home. What did Ash think if Ed was still alive? Because Carol said, oh, Ed took Sophia to France. So was Ash just assuming Ed was dead? What if Carol came back with Ed and Sophia? So that's some lazy writing or a big oversight on Ash's thought, assuming that only Sophia would come back, not Sophia and Ed. Or Sophia and her auntie. So what's going on there? So it seems like maybe Ash is being maybe a bit spiteful at the end. But if not, Ash didn't think this through. And that's the episode. So let's move over to my one sentence / one word over review. And I have to say, this is a good episode. And I would give it a 7 out of 10. It's a big improvement on episode 4. But it's nowhere near as good as episode 3. That episode was absolutely phenomenal. This is just a good episode and I really enjoyed it. So please tell me down below, what did you think of this episode? Did you love it? Did you hate it? I'd like to know all your thoughts down in the comments. This is it for me today. So goodbye, peace out, and I'll talk to you later.